It was a cold, moonless night in mid-November when Lisa found herself alone in her family's spacious suburban home. Her parents were away on a business trip, leaving her to house sit for the weekend. She had always felt safe in their quiet neighborhood, with its well-manicured lawns and friendly neighbors, but tonight, something felt off. Lisa settled into the living room, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a mug of hot chocolate in hand. She turned on the TV, hoping to find a light-hearted movie to keep her company. The rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound accompanying the low hum of the television. Around 10 p.m., just as Lisa was starting to relax, she heard a faint noise coming from the back of the house. She muted the TV and listened intently. It sounded like someone was trying to open the back door. Her heart began to race as she stood up and walked cautiously towards the kitchen. The noise stopped abruptly, and Lisa peered through the window but saw nothing unusual. She told herself it was probably just the wind or a stray animal, and returned to the living room, trying to shake off her unease. Half an hour later, the sound returned, this time louder and more persistent. It was clear that someone was trying to force their way in. Panic set in as Lisa realized she was not alone. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but before she could press the call button, the back door burst open with a loud crash. 3 masked figures stormed into the kitchen, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as she ducked behind the couch, trying to stay out of sight. She could hear them talking in hushed tones, their voices low and menacing. "Search the house," one of them ordered. "Take anything valuable." Lisa knew she had to act quickly. She crawled towards the stairs, keeping low and silent. Her mind raced as she tried to remember where her father kept his old baseball bat. Once upstairs, she hurried into her parents' bedroom and found the bat in the closet. She crept back to the top of the stairs and listened. The intruders were rummaging through the kitchen and living room, breaking things and throwing items around. She heard one of them coming up the stairs and braced herself. As the intruder reached the landing, Lisa swung the bat with all her strength, striking him in the head. He fell to the floor with a grunt, unconscious. She quickly grabbed his phone and ran into her room, locking the door behind her. Breathing heavily, Lisa dialed 911 on the intruder's phone. "Please help me," she whispered urgently. "There are intruders in my house. I've knocked one out, but there are 2 more." The dispatcher assured her that police were on their way and instructed her to stay hidden. Lisa could hear the other 2 intruders downstairs, calling out to their fallen accomplice. "Jake, where are you?" "Jake." Lisa's heart raced as she heard them coming up the stairs. She knew she had to buy time until the police arrived. She grabbed her laptop and opened it, trying to make noise and create a diversion. One of the intruders pounded on her door. "We know you're in there. Open up." Lisa didn't respond. Instead, she took a deep breath and prepared herself for the worst. The door shuddered as the intruder tried to force it open. The lock held, but it wouldn't hold for long. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. The intruders paused, their panic palpable. "We need to get out of here now." Lisa heard them retreating down the stairs and the sound of the front door slamming. She stayed put, clutching the bat, until she heard the reassuring voices of the police. "Miss, it's safe now. You can come out." Trembling, Lisa unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. The police officers escorted her downstairs and outside, where the flashing lights of patrol cars illuminated the street. They apprehended the unconscious intruder and assured Lisa that they would find the other 2. Lisa's parents rushed home the next day, their faces etched with worry and relief. They hugged her tightly, grateful that she was safe. The police praised Lisa for her bravery and quick thinking, and the neighborhood rallied around her, offering support and comfort. In the weeks that followed, Lisa struggled to shake off the lingering fear. She installed additional security measures and attended self-defense classes, determined never to feel that vulnerable again. The memory of that night haunted her, but it also made her stronger. Lisa's story spread throughout the town, a chilling reminder of the dangers that could lurk even in the safest of places. She knew she had been lucky, but she also knew that she had faced her worst nightmare and survived. And as she stood at her window, looking out into the darkened street, Lisa vowed never to let fear control her life again. The night they came had changed her forever, but it had also revealed a strength she never knew she had. Jessica lived in a quiet, secluded neighborhood, surrounded by dense woods and winding roads. Her home was a charming two-story house with a wraparound porch, a peaceful retreat she had inherited from her grandmother. One chilly November evening, she found herself alone, her husband away on a business trip, and her children at their grandparents' house for the weekend. As night fell, Jessica settled in with a good book and a cup of tea, savoring the tranquility. The only sounds were the crackling of the fireplace and the distant hoot of an owl. She felt safe and secure in her home, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the encroaching darkness. Around 11 p.m., a sudden noise shattered the silence. It was a soft, almost imperceptible tapping on the back door. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She set her book down and listened, trying to convince herself it was just a tree branch brushing against the house. But the tapping continued, more insistent this time. Jessica stood up and walked cautiously to the kitchen. The back door, which led to the porch, had a small window covered by a curtain. She hesitated before pulling it aside and peering out. There was nothing but the darkness of the backyard, illuminated by a faint sliver of moonlight. She was about to turn away when the tapping resumed, louder now. Jessica's eyes widened in horror as she saw a shadowy figure standing just outside the door. She could make out the outline of a face pressed against the glass, the eyes dark and empty. Panicking, Jessica backed away from the door and grabbed her phone. She dialed 911, but before she could hit the call button, the figure outside spoke in a low, menacing voice. "Open the door, Jessica." She froze. How did this person know her name? She felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. Her hand trembled as she pressed the call button, but the phone screen flickered and went black. "Open the door," the voice repeated, more forcefully this time. Jessica turned and ran towards the front of the house. She needed to get out to find help. She reached the front door and fumbled with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. She tried the windows, but they too seemed stuck, as if they had been sealed shut. Desperation set in. Jessica ran upstairs to her bedroom, locking the door behind her. She rummaged through the closet and found her grandmother's old revolver, a relic she had kept more for sentimental value than for protection. She checked the chamber. Loaded. The house was eerily silent now, except for the pounding of her heart. Jessica crept to the window and peeked out. The backyard was empty, the figure gone. She breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. Jessica's breath came in shallow gasps as she strained to listen. Footsteps echoed up the stairs, slow and deliberate. She gripped the revolver tightly, aiming it at the door. The footsteps stopped outside her room, and she heard the doorknob turn. "Open the door, Jessica," the voice said again, this time closer, more sinister. The door rattled as the intruder tried to force it open. Jessica's mind raced. She had to defend herself, but she was terrified of what waited on the other side. She steeled herself, finger on the trigger. The door burst open, and a dark figure lunged at her. Jessica fired the revolver, the deafening sound reverberating through the room. The figure fell to the floor with a thud, and Jessica's hands shook as she held the gun, her breath ragged. But then she noticed something strange. The figure on the floor wasn't bleeding. In fact, it wasn't even human. It was a life-size doll, dressed in dark clothes, its glass eyes staring blankly at her. Confusion and terror gripped Jessica. Who had sent this doll, and why? She stepped closer, her heart pounding, and saw a note pinned to its chest. In the dim light, she read the chilling message. "You're next." A sudden noise from downstairs made her jump. More footsteps and voices. Multiple intruders moving through the house. Jessica realized with horror that the doll was a distraction, a cruel game to instill fear. She knew she had to act quickly. Grabbing her phone, she tried to call 911 again, but the signal was still dead. She had to find a way out. Jessica climbed out of the bedroom window onto the roof, moving as quietly as she could. The cold night air bit into her skin, but she forced herself to focus. From the roof, she saw shadows moving inside the house, flashlights cutting through the darkness. She inched her way towards the trellis, which she hoped would support her weight. Just as she began to climb down, one of the intruders stepped out onto the porch below. Jessica froze, holding her breath. The intruder scanned the yard with a flashlight, but didn't look up. She waited until he moved back inside before continuing her descent. Her feet touched the ground, and she ran towards the woods, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she couldn't stop, couldn't look back. She had to reach the neighbors and get help. Branches whipped at her face and hands as she ran through the forest, the darkness closing in around her. She could hear the intruders shouting, realizing she was gone. Finally, she saw the lights of her neighbor's house through the trees. She stumbled towards the porch and pounded on the door, praying they were home. The door opened and her neighbor, Mr. Harris, stood there, his eyes wide with concern. "Jessica, what's happened?" he asked, ushering her inside. "Call the police," she gasped. "They're in my house." Mr. Harris didn't hesitate. He dialed 911 and handed her the phone. The dispatcher assured her that officers were on their way. Jessica collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The police arrived within minutes, swarming the property. They searched the house and surrounding area, but the intruders were gone, leaving no trace except the doll and the ominous note. Jessica's home, once a sanctuary, was now tainted with fear. In the following weeks, Jessica installed an advanced security system and took self-defense classes, determined never to feel that vulnerable again. The police continued their investigation, but the intruders were never found. Jessica's story spread through the community, a chilling reminder of the dangers that could lurk in even the safest neighborhoods. She knew she had been lucky to escape, but the experience left her haunted, always looking over her shoulder. The night they came would forever be etched in her memory, a stark reminder of the evil that could invade even the most peaceful of homes. And though she had survived, the shadows of that night would never fully leave her. Emily had always loved her quaint little house on the outskirts of town. Surrounded by dense woods and far from the hustle and bustle of the city, it was her sanctuary. She lived alone, enjoying the peace and quiet that came with her secluded location. But one winter night, her peaceful existence was shattered. It was a particularly cold evening, and a heavy snowfall had blanketed the ground. Emily had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet night in. She prepared a warm meal, lit a few candles, and settled in with a good book by the fireplace. As the hours passed, Emily began to feel drowsy. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. She decided to call it a night and headed upstairs to her bedroom. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards and the distant howl of the wind outside. Just as she was about to drift off to sleep, Emily heard a noise coming from downstairs. It was faint, like the sound of something scraping against the window. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. Straining to listen, she heard it again. This time it was louder and more persistent. She tried to convince herself it was just a tree branch or an animal, but the noise didn't stop. Summoning her courage, Emily got out of bed and crept down the stairs, her footsteps silent on the carpeted steps. She reached the bottom and peered into the living room, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then she heard it again, a scraping sound, now coming from the back door. Emily's heart raced as she tiptoed towards the kitchen, where the back door was located. She flicked on the light and gasped. There, in the dim glow, She saw a handprint smeared on the glass, as if someone had pressed their palm against it. Panic set in. Emily ran to the door and locked it, her hands shaking. She checked the windows, making sure they were all secure. Her mind raced with thoughts of who could be out there and what they wanted. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. The snowstorm must have knocked out the signal. Feeling a surge of fear, Emily remembered her father's old hunting rifle, which she kept in the basement. She hurried downstairs, her pulse pounding in her ears. She found the rifle in a box of ammunition, loading it with trembling hands. Armed and determined to protect herself, she returned to the main floor. Emily decided to wait in the living room, where she had a clear view of the front and back doors. She turned off all the lights, hoping the darkness would conceal her. As she sat there, gripping the rifle, she listened intently for any sound. Minutes felt like hours as the storm raged outside. The wind howled, and the snow battered against the windows. Just when Emily thought she might have imagined the whole thing, she heard footsteps crunching in the snow, coming closer to the house. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw a figure moving outside the living room window. The person was tall, wearing a dark coat and a hood that obscured their face. They stopped right outside the window, peering in as if searching for something. Emily's heart pounded. She tightened her grip on the rifle, ready to defend herself. The figure moved away from the window and she heard them circling the house. Suddenly, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the house. They were trying to break in. She aimed the rifle at the hallway, her hands shaking. The sound of footsteps grew louder as the intruder made their way toward the living room. Emily could see their shadow on the wall, getting closer and closer. As the intruder stepped into the room, Emily took a deep breath and steadied her aim. "Stay where you are," she shouted, her voice trembling but firm. The figure froze but didn't back away. "You don't have to do this," a deep, chilling voice said. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Then why are you here?" Emily demanded, her finger hovering over the trigger. "I'm here for what's mine," the intruder replied cryptically. Before Emily could respond, the figure lunged at her. She pulled the trigger, the deafening sound of the shot reverberating through the house. The intruder fell to the floor, clutching their shoulder, but still very much alive. Emily didn't wait to see what happened next. She bolted for the front door, throwing it open and running out into the snowstorm. She sprinted through the snow, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She needed to find help, but the nearest house was half a mile away. The storm raged around her, making it difficult to see. She stumbled through the snow, her mind racing with fear. She glanced back and saw the intruder limping after her, their dark figure barely visible in the blizzard. Emily pushed herself harder, the cold biting into her skin. She knew she couldn't outrun them forever, but she had to try. Just as she felt she couldn't go any further, she saw a light in the distance. It was her neighbor's house, a beacon of hope in the storm. She reached the front porch and pounded on the door, shouting for help. The door opened and her neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stood there, his eyes wide with shock. "Emily, what's happened?" "There's someone after me," she gasped. "Call the police." Mr. Thompson didn't hesitate. He pulled her inside and locked the door, then grabbed his phone and dialed 911. Emily collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the howl of the storm. They searched the area and found the intruder, wounded but still alive, hiding in the woods. They apprehended him and took him into custody. As the officers questioned her, Emily learned that the intruder was a wanted criminal who had been hiding in the area for weeks. He had chosen her house as his target, hoping to find refuge from the storm. Emily's sense of security was shattered that night. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of knowing that someone had invaded her sanctuary. She installed new locks and security cameras, but the memory of that night haunted her. She knew she had been lucky to escape with her life, but the fear lingered. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind made her jump. The intruder's words echoed in her mind. "I'm here for what's mine." What had he been looking for? She would never know, but she was determined to never let fear control her life again. Emily's story became a cautionary tale in the neighborhood, a reminder of the dangers that could lurk even in the most peaceful places. And though she tried to move on, the shadow of that night stayed with her, a constant reminder of the unseen watcher who had invaded her home.